Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train a little bit, though I'm sure he will come up. And we are talking to the wonderful Gillian Gaar. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little about yourself.
I'm Seattle based and I've written a number of books, 20 something. I always lose count. You have to, when did count it up? You always remember if you have 1 to 5 books, right? But then there get to be so many. And they're all about music, musicians. And I've written for a lot of magazines and publications over the years. And for many years, I was at the Rocket magazine in Seattle during the whole wanted grunge period, although beyond that too, that was in the 80s before any of that really took off, and then zip all the way up to almost the end of the 90s. So that was the longest gig I ever had at a publication. It's sadly gone now, but not forgotten.
There's a lot of great rock and music magazines that are gone. We miss them.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, you've got a book that my listeners might be interested in coming out shortly, don't you?
Hmm. Yes. I hope it's of interest to them.
Yes. Tell us a little about it.
Okay. I thought you were going to say the title, but I will.
Yeah.
So this is part of a series that Motor Books has put out. They're an imprint of Quarto, larger publisher. And a couple years ago, they started this series called Such and Such Artist at 75, or maybe it was 50 or wherever. And the first artist in that series was David Bowie. And the next book in that series was Elton John at 75. And I did that one.
Okay.
I'd written for other imprints of Quarto before. That's how they knew who I was. I finished that one, and what would you like to do next? And so they suggested Bruce Springsteen at 75. And I think the reason they suggested that to me was
Hmm.
that a different imprint of Quarto called Voyager Press, they had a series that was such and such artist, the illustrated history, or the complete illustrated history, kind of variations on that. So in 2016, I'd done, it was a general overall history. It was called Boss, Bruce Springsteen, the E Street Band, the illustrated history. And as I say, it was a general overview. I think it was maybe 40 to 50,000 words, which sounds like it's a lot, but it really isn't that much. So I think they tapped me for Bruce Springsteen at 75 because I'd done that first one. And in a way, I already had much of the work done because of that, because that came out in 2016. So you could see what the highlights were from then and then
Yeah.
add subsequent highlights from 2016 to now. I think the last entry, I believe, was the tour, the 2023 tour.
Yeah. When you're talking about books, you're hitting the 2023 tour just seems like it was yesterday. So you're getting pretty common, pretty current events. So yeah, we're going to talk a lot of Bruce. We're going to talk about some of your other books, but I always like to start at the beginning. So where did you grow up and what kind of music was your family listening to when you were younger?
What's interesting is everybody had their own tastes. And this
Right.
would mostly be in California until we moved up to Seattle, which at that time, that was the 60s, and no one really knew much about Seattle in the rest of the world. And even after the 60s, when I first went to England in 79 and 80, and people didn't even know where Seattle was, which is hard to imagine now because now people would think, oh, Amazon and Microsoft and grunge and all that, Starbucks, but that wasn't around then. So when I grew up, I think I adopted my mother's taste the most. She liked the musicals. I'm a big fan of musicals. The original Broadway recording of My Fair Lady is that would be in my top 10. And she also liked classical music like Tchaikovsky and similar things, the real more popular stuff. My father wasn't really a fan of either of those formats, but I remember during the 60s anyway, he had I think all of the A&M Records catalog, which in that day, in that era was Herb Alpert of the Tijuana Brass and the Baja Marimba Band. So that kind of instrumental pop type stuff. I never dreamed listening to that stuff I'd get to interview Herb Alpert one day. That was pretty amazing. I wish I could have told my father. And they had some of like the classic pop singers of that era. They had a Rosemary Clooney greatest hits album that I was fascinated by some of the songs like Come On to My House, which as a child, that song really intrigued me because the other meaning of the song just went over my head. I'm 6 years old or something, but it
Sure.
just sounded like you went to this house and you got all this great stuff.
Yeah.
Figs and dates and grapes and cakes, and I think birthday cake and peach and pear and all this. So I thought, wow, that must be the greatest house in the world. And yeah, there were some other great songs on that one. This Old House, of course. I love that keyboard in the middle section. I wondered later, I became a writer, and I wondered if perhaps one reason I liked things like musicals or those Rosemary Clooney songs was because they had a lot of words in them. And I became fascinated by words. And then I want to mention this. This will make people go look it up later. My parents also had this record, Frankie Yankovic's Greatest Hits. And there was this song on there called Who Stole the Kishka, which I adored. It's a very lively song. It has this wonky sax going through it, and they're all going yip yip through it. And it was just a really exciting song. And as a child, you weren't allowed to play records yourself. You had to wait for your parent to put it on. So it was just this rare thing when they would put the record on. And the other thing that intrigued me was I had no idea what a kishka was. I didn't know what it was, why they were so upset at losing it, and so on. It gets found, by the way. It has a happy ending. And it's a sausage, which I guess you could figure out from the lyric, round and firm and fully packed. It was standing on the rack. Someone stole the kishka when I turned my back. But anyway, that was a favorite song. And then I had an older sibling, and it was probably through her that I discovered the Beatles.
Yeah.
Although in those days, probably everybody would at least know about them, like your parents would know about them, even if they weren't interested in them, because of the way entertainment was presented. We all watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan because that's what you did on Sunday night. I think probably everybody with a television in the country would watch Ed Sullivan because that was your entertainment. And they did put those shows together well, I think. They'd have a rock act or an act for the young people or the youngsters, as Ed liked to call them, talking about 20-year-olds, not
Yeah.
children. That was one of the fun parts when he's introducing the Beatles. These youngsters from Liverpool.
Yes, exactly.
John Lennon is 23.
Yeah. So a couple things I've got to cover with first. Um, my parents also had Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass, Whipped Creams and Other Delights, and a very young Jesse was fascinated by that album cover, though he did not know why. And listeners, if you have never seen the cover, Google it and you will understand why 6 or 7 year old Jesse found it interesting. But we're going to move on past that embarrassment. When we moved to Dallas, my wife and I, still no kids, we started going to local clubs to hear local bands play. And one of them we found is a band called Brave Combo. Have you ever heard of them?
Mm-mm.
So I will send you the link. Their album Polkathorasis. They were in shorthand a rock and roll polka band. And Who Stole the Kishka was one of the first songs they played.
Oh,
And
what?
yes, and it is one of our favorite songs. And so I will send you the link so you can hear it on YouTube, and you will have to tell me if they did it justice or not. Yeah, it's just one of my favorite songs. You've talked a really good background on music, but I want to flip it just for a moment. Was your family a big readers? Were you a big reader? And when did you get the itch that you may want to be a writer?
Yeah, I'm a big reader, and my parents were big readers, and I think that's why I read that sense in child psychology books or something, or not even child psychology books. It's just like accepted wisdom. Your kids pick up a lot from you when you're not even realizing it. So you see your parents reading books or magazines, the newspaper, and talking about it, and that's what you're going to do. Yeah, I was a big reader. I remember I used to be in some community theater productions, and when I was a child and a teenager. And I remember later seeing someone who I worked on one of those productions with, probably later in my 20s or maybe even older. And she said, "You always had a book with you." So I guess I always took one around because you never know when you get a moment to read. And there's I should have written down this author's name, but there's this interesting book called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. And it looks at how a lot of people, you read things online or on your iPad or your phone or whatever. And it made some interesting points, studies they've done that I hadn't realized. It said that you retain information better if you read it from a physical thing like a book rather than on a screen. Because when you read it on the screen, you tend to just skim over it. And that was really interesting to read, and how it just reading things on a screen will dumb you down after a while. It's not saying don't go online and read things. It's
Yeah.
just saying, you need your balance in there.
So I think it is the happy medium. I was always I was a physical book guy, always had physical books. And then when I would go on a business trip, I would be the guy that brought 3 or 4 books in
Mm-hmm.
his suitcase because what if I ran out of things to read? And in fact, one of my coworkers, we were waiting for the flight, and I went into the bookstore and she said, "How many books do you have in your suitcase?" And I said, "3." "And yet you're in a bookstore." "Well, you never know." And so I resisted getting a Kindle till I realized that if I'm reading my Kindle and the next day I pull up my phone, it can remember where I was in my book on my Kindle.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, now then I had a book with me all the time. And I've been converted for that reason, though I have heard from other people that it isn't quite the same as reading a physical media. And I guess I give up that for the convenience of always having a book with me because I was that person as well.
Mm-hmm.
I carried a book everywhere. In fact, I remember when I was an outside salesperson, someone said, "Why do you have a book with you?" And I said, "Oh, if the guy I'm calling on has a few minutes, it's going to be a few minutes, I just pull my book. And that way, instead of getting frustrated or mad that they're not ready for me, I just, oh, good, I can read." Yeah. So, let's talk about being a writer. So you established you loved music, you loved writing, reading. So how about writing? Was that something that was an early love as well? And how did you end up getting to write not one but 2 books about Bruce Springsteen?
Let's see. I guess writing was there from the beginning too, though not just something I enjoyed doing, not something I thought of pursuing as a career. But, and I'm talking about when I'm a child, so you're not really thinking about
Sure.
careers.
Yeah.
But I like to tell other people about things I'd read or seen that I liked. And I don't have this anymore, but I would draw these kind of comic strips. And I did a comic strip based on Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, which had come out in '68, I think it was. And if you've seen
Okay.
that, you know that certainly at the beginning, when you see the young men from the houses of Capulet and Montague and the outfits they wear, and there's, I don't know, maybe we'd say like jester outfits, because the very bright
Yes.
primary colors, red on one side of the chest and yellow on the other, but then that would be reversed on the legs. It would be yellow on the other
Yeah.
leg, red on they had these very elaborate, colorful costumes, and that caught my attention. And even as a kid, it's got a story you can follow. That's one thing people get. They think Shakespeare is something you have to be educated to hear or listen to and understand, which really isn't the case. And certainly when I took a Shakespeare class in college because I wanted to read more of it, and I remember the professor saying that this was the entertainment of the day. Instead of watching TV or going to the movies, people went to these plays. So yes, they weren't highbrow and esoteric. They were appealing to a general audience. So you shouldn't be intimidated by reading Shakespeare. But yeah, I remember writing those comic books, and I do parody magazines on just regular paper, fold it in half. That was a common, that was a popular thing to do. And then I guess maybe in junior high is when I maybe started writing more formal articles, would say for the school newspaper, a natural place to start. And then yeah, just progressed from there. So when I first got to college, I thought I wanted to be in communications because this was the era of Woodward and Bernstein and all the President's Men, and it just made journalists seem like these kind of superheroes. They could bring
Sure.
the truth to the people. And so then everyone wanted to be a journalist and find that big scoop and things. That's what I started out in college as, but then I went to England and got sidetracked. So that was when I started doing fanzines, which I guess some were mimeograph, but these are mostly Xerox publications. You would, I've even thought of, if I had the time, it'd be fun to do one now, just like the old school way, instead of on a computer with that kind of application. You take your paper, you'd write the story and maybe glue a picture on it, and then you'd Xerox it, and then you'd staple all the pages together. There was a
So,
rock band. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I just was going to tell you that I currently do a Doctor Who podcast with my good friend Charles, and he and I met when we were doing a Teen Titan, which is a comic book series done by DC Comics, and we did a fanzine. And we always joke about that. Believe it or not, there'd be 40 of us, 45, and we would all write either our fan fiction or our kind of blog, or we'd review everyone else's fan fiction, and we'd send 45 copies to the central mailer, and the central mailer would take them and put them all together and then staple them, and you would get it back with everyone's else's zine in there, because that's what we did, right? That was what you did. So yes, I absolutely believe, I love that my John Hyatt host did a John Hyatt fanzine for many years. So yes, it is a very different compared to now, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know, especially then when you wrote away for someone else's fanzine and just the weight in
Yeah,
getting, if you wanted to get an imported record or something, if they didn't have it in the local store, you could
yeah.
maybe some magazine that had an ad and write and hope that you would get something back. It would take so long, but then maybe that was what made it part of what made it so special, because there was that anticipation. And so when you finally got the item, the fanzine or the record or whatever it was you ordered, that was just, it was like this little score that you managed to pull off. Oh, I got it, I got it. And you might be the only one in town that had it, for all you know.
Yeah.
I did
Um,
a fanzine on Kate Bush. That was a bit more professionally laid out. So
so that's a tangent we're going to go on for a few minutes. How happy you were that her making the Hall of Fame?
yes, oh yeah, yeah. I knew she was. I doubted she was going to show up though.
Yeah, I know. My wife and our we started dating in 1980, and the two artists she introduced me to is she adored Kate Bush and John Hyatt. And she remains loves Kate Bush. Just loves, and would have, and every once in a while when we talk about, it's silly people spending that much money to go see someone live. And I said, if we had it, if you knew Kate Bush was performing live, and it would not put us in the Porthouse, what would you pay? She says, okay, good point. Good point.
So
Yeah.
so you didn't go see her in 2014?
No, nope, we did. Yeah, it would have
Well,
been,
I did.
oh, you did tell me. How was it?
Let's see. I actually went twice, and this I was thinking about this because I was reading some, maybe it was something online about her, maybe the Facebook post, maybe it was not her birthday, but some other anniversary thing, and saying, oh, I know, it was saying, oh, tickets went on sale for the shows and they sold out in 15 minutes. And I thought that's not quite what happened, because it would be better to say the tickets that they put on sale that day sold out in 15 minutes. It wasn't all the tickets available, because there was
Right.
a pre-sale for fans, and that's how I got in, and got a ticket. And then they also had a VIP ticket that was very expensive, and those did not sell out right away. So I kept debating. I thought, I'm going all the way to England. It sure would be nice to see her twice instead of just the once.
Sure.
The only tickets were these VIP tickets that they included a fancy meal beforehand at a
Hmm.
nearby church hall. And the ticket was about 1 month's rent.
Wow.
But I decided to get it. And the whole experience, even just the whole experience before the shows too, as much as the show, because there was this one fellow named Martin who had just decided to start hosting fan meetups at this pub that was very near the venue. And word spread on Facebook, and that became a thing. And I thought, okay, I'll go there before the show, and you get to hang out with some Kate fans. And it was really fun. They reserved the whole back room for us. It's great to be able to talk with people that you have this starting point for your conversation. That was great. And just being in there, just the anticipation of being in there. And I know I think I would have been happy if the first part of the show, the act one, if she did just do a bunch of different songs that as a real concert would be. But she'd said in an interview she felt that would be boring and people wouldn't like it that much, which I think she underestimated what people would have liked. I think
Yeah.
it would have been the joke about reading the phone book.
Yes.
But which kind of she does on the song Pie from Ariel anyway. That's the close to that. So I like those opening songs. And then she went into the whole Ninth Wave from the second side of the Dreaming. And I'd listened to that so long that you have your own picture of it. So it wasn't quite the same when you how you visualize it when it was on stage. But I really liked Act Two, which was drawn from Ariel, one of the discs. It must have been the second one. It sort of takes you through the course of a day. And it's a real symphonic piece, but it worked really well on stage. It's not necessarily telling a story except the arc of the day. So that was interesting.
So I feel like I could talk more Kate Bush for the rest of the hour, but I won't do that. But I do want to talk to me about your first book and why you wanted to pick that topic. And if my research is correct, you were talking about female icons in rock and roll. And I do think that often they get the short end of the stick. So talk to me a little bit about that.
I was really lucky in getting my first book because I wasn't trying to get a book deal. And I don't know, there was a part of me that just thought something will happen. And this did. So that was amazing. I told you about working at the Rocket magazine.
Right.
I'd done a story about, I forget who it was now, someone like the Indigo Girls or someone like that who were coming to town. And so it was a larger piece about them, or but then I also mentioned, they're lumped in with this whole women in rock thing because at that point, every 5 years, it seemed they'd do a new article on women in rock as if they hadn't been there from the beginning. And I said, women have always been in rock. They're not like this novelty that pops up. And I made
Right.
listed examples going back to Big Mama Thornton doing Hound Dog, first of all. And then you had Wanda Jackson and these other people in the 50s. And that was just a sidelight in the article, which a larger article was about someone else. At that time in Seattle, there was a publisher called Seal Press, and they specialized in putting out books about women and women's issues. They've since been subsumed into increasingly larger publishing houses. Seal Press still exists, but they're part of Hachette now. That's the Hachette group. Anyway, an editor at Seal Press read my piece, and she liked that whole idea of, yeah, there were always women in rock and roll. So she contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in doing a book. And at that point, they were thinking of having me edit a book that would have essays about women in rock. And I would presumably write one of them and do other things. But the more we talked about it, Faith, that was my editor, Faith Conlon, she thought it would be better to do a complete history and just have one person write it because it's just makes it easier to deal with. So
Right.
that's what became a history. It's in the subtitle. She's a Rebel, the history of women in rock and roll. And I guess I had the most time ever to work on that one because I kept saying they were more understanding than other publishers that want you to get things out sooner. But they were a small press, and so I think maybe they had to be understanding. It's not like I got some huge advance and that I could live on for a year or so. So it took about 3 years, I think. Yeah, 89, and then it came out in 92. And then there was a 10-year anniversary edition that came out in 2002, and that had 3 new chapters. So that's a pretty good chunk of a book. That's like an extra third of a book. But that's partly why I haven't done another update because I thought I don't know if I could go through all that again. Because what I was doing in the book was not just talking about performers and that history and some of the women that people don't know about that much, but also women involved in other areas of the music industry that you don't necessarily think about, being a producer or even being a roadie, that kind of thing. So I know there are people that like that brought in other women or the other roles that women play in the industry besides just being musicians and publicists, because usually that's where you find women. And I've talked to some publicists too. But
Because I'm fascinated by the story, right? There is a lack of women in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There is often people make light of their experiences. And so I think that's really cool. As I look here, before I move on from that, were there things that surprised you? And the reason why I brought this up is there is a great podcast from Andrew Hickey, which is the history of rock and roll 500 songs. I recommend to anyone who loves music to listen to it. And he is going in chronological order, picking a song to tell the story. And a few months ago, he did Janet Joplin, and Little Piece of My Heart was the song he picked from her. And it was fascinating to hear that story. And his perspective is that she never got to sing necessarily the way she wanted to sing or perform the music she wanted to perform, that it was always a kind of a pushed into a label. And I just spent some time talking to Gail Davies, who is credited often as one of the first country music female producers. And the same thing, she's talking about, yes, they always want to put us in a box. So any thoughts you want to share about the research you did for the people in, the women in your book?
One thing that I probably I hadn't noticed and never really thought about was how, particularly in the teen idol era, you have a lot of men and women doing light, fluffy pop songs.
Sure.
And then you grow up and you can't do that kind of song anymore. And the men would often just go into the other side of the business. They'd go and become a producer, for example. And the
Yeah.
women were just left there. They usually didn't go on to be producers. Sometimes, if they were strong enough, like Carole King's an obvious example. Carole King, and she worked with her then husband, Jerry Goffin, and wrote all these classic songs. They ended up getting divorced. And yeah, I think Jerry continued songwriting and production too. I think Carole, she had her talent, and it just had to wait a little longer until Tapestry came out in 71 and kind of boom, blew the roof off then. That was the best selling record of its time.
Yeah.
For a number of years, that was the record, the biggest selling record, maybe
Yeah.
just biggest selling record. Anyway, yeah, so she had that. But other women who weren't Carole King just didn't seem to be able to reinvent themselves as easily. And then just hearing about, I don't know, women being taken advantage of in different ways, not just being ripped off as a musician, which obviously that's a common thing that happens to a lot of musicians of both genders. But Turner's the most obvious example. But there were so many. I'd be talking to women. Which one was it? Was it no, I don't want to say in case she wasn't in a bad
Okay.
relationship, but I don't want to say the name and find out, oh, wait a minute. No,
Right.
that wasn't her at all.
Someone, okay, so
But just
blank
too many
was in a
women
bad
being,
relationship.
yeah, just too many women ended up there sacrificed because they ended up in a toxic relationship. And sometimes it was a bad business relationship. Like the woman who
Yeah.
was buying a guitar helped co-found this label, but then the guy shoved her out of the business and she went on and did other things. But yeah, it was just that got depressing to read about.
Yeah. The great Darlene Love is I think a great example of that, that has had a resurgent, but at one point hardly anyone thought of her and that, and often obviously because of little Steven and Bruce's great affection for her, that's another reason why she's come to Springsteen fans. They've embraced her. And then because of the Phil Spector and that relationship, right? That it is very, it's just very sad sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And certainly monetarily, for a while, Darlene was cleaning homes. She was
Yes.
working as a house cleaner. In the one film, what is it? I guess it's 60 Feet from Stardom, though she's probably said
Yeah.
this in other things too. She'd be going to
Yeah.
clean homes in Beverly Hills, and she had a nice car because for when she had money. So she would park her car blocks away so they wouldn't see this nice car being parked in front
Yeah.
of this home that she was going in to clean. So I think that happened with Ruth Brown too. But then she got a resurgence. She met a lawyer who they set up the R&B Foundation and began getting artists back their royalties that they had not
Mm.
received and giving financial payments to artists that
Yeah.
needed them for illness or things. And then she got in Hairspray, and that just gave her a whole new career.
Yeah.
Original movie, non-musical.
I also noticed you've written a couple of books on Elvis. What's the Is
him.
there a specific connection there and why?
When I grew up, I wasn't that interested in Elvis because I remember seeing the movies on TV. It'd be the 3 o'clock movie.
Yeah.
And they were always the 60s movies, most of which weren't that great. As I learned later, Elvis himself would certainly agree with you.
Yeah.
In fact, if he had come in a room watching, 10-year-old me watching that, he'd probably go, "Why are you watching that crap?" and switch it off.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a surprise. But what began changing my mind was when I read the first Beatles biography, The Beatles by Hunter Davies. Because, see, I heard the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, as we mentioned earlier. And because I was so young, I literally believed that they invented rock and roll. I thought it started with them. I didn't think there was anything before it. So it was
Sure.
exciting to learn that there was a lot before. And so in this book, they talk about their influences, and one of them was Elvis. And I thought he must have something going for him if the Beatles like him. And one song that caught my attention was Hound Dog, which they used in a commercial for a box set of his recordings. And it has this cold opening with him just singing the first line, and that's really great. Or no, it doesn't. It has the, no, wait, yeah, it does. Sorry, I'm answering myself in my head.
That's okay.
So then it was just gradually coming to him in whatever year it came out, 80 or 81. I saw the documentary, This Is Elvis.
Yeah.
Some of you may remember it, kind of docudrama in parts. They recreate things. But
Right.
what was fascinating then was they got all these clips of Elvis in performance. And today, you just go on YouTube and say Elvis on Ed Sullivan or
Right.
Elvis Comeback Special, and you'd see these clips. But you couldn't do that then. So it was exciting to see all this stuff. And I thought, okay, that's an overview. And then I remember telling Peter Grolnick this later. I said, the first Elvis books I read were Elvis What Happened and Albert Goldman's biography. And he said, "Oh, you got a great introduction,"
Yeah.
meaning that sarcastically. Peter Grolnick, of course, going on to write the definitive Elvis biographies. Though the one thing I certainly Albert Goldman goes over the top in his writing, but at that point, I knew very little about Elvis, even the most a lot of basic details. So in that sense, it was useful because he does chart everything that happened, and that really gave me a better sense of the scope of his career. But I probably didn't really start getting into him a lot until the 90s with Peter's biographies. The first one, Last Train to Memphis, which takes you up to Elvis going in the army. And what I think is so interesting about his books and other nonfiction books that I like, a lot of them do the same thing, type of thing too, is that it's the story of Elvis, yes, but it's also the story of the rise of the rock and roll industry. Because
Right.
people forget or don't realize now that when rock and roll was crossing over to the mainstream and becoming big business, people didn't think it was going to last very long.
Right.
Even people like Elvis, the performers themselves didn't necessarily think it was going to last and grow and develop and become the big business that he eventually became. It was just another fad, like the latest dance craze. So that part is interesting too. And then I had been writing for Goldmine magazine for a long time, the record collecting magazine. And in the 90s, you started seeing a lot of Elvis reissues. So that was really when I began listening to him more and I could write about the reissues. And 95, that was the first year I went to Graceland,
Okay.
which certainly, I think if you don't have to be an Elvis fan to enjoy Graceland, it helps, obviously. But I think if you're interested in pop culture, you'd find it an interesting experience.
So my son, I guess maybe 10, 11, I'll have to think, but we were on a vacation and we went to Memphis and we did Graceland because, hey, we're tourists and that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And he was fascinated that you couldn't go upstairs. That captivated him. Like, what's up there? And I'm like, it's probably storage, Chris, but yeah. And so he's now 33 and still adores Elvis music. Just that idea. We when the new Elvis movie came out a year or so ago, we had to be at opening night, opening weekend. So yeah, so as you've gotten this, you become an I won't use the word fan, but an admirer of the man's performance and his talent. How did writing a book start on that? How did that happen?
Let's see. The Elvis book, by then I'd had some books out already. And I had got a book from this British publisher called Jawbone Press.
Okay.
And it was Bowie in Berlin, about the so called Berlin series of albums that Bowie put out, which were People say they think all three of them were recorded in Berlin, but I think only two were, but they still call it
Okay.
the Berlin series. And reading that gave me the idea that a number of Jawbone's books, certainly at that time, just they weren't necessarily a full comprehensive history, but they focused on a period in an artist's life, like this with Bowie in Berlin. So I thought it'd be great to do a book about Elvis, about the comeback period from when he did the comeback special. And the year after that, he recorded in Memphis for the first time since the 50s. And that's when he did the hits like Suspicious Minds and Kentucky Rain and those great songs. And then he went back to live performance that summer in Vegas. And so I pitched that idea to them. And they said, okay. So that's how that happened. And again, I lucked out because by then I'd been doing some Elvis stories for Goldmine mostly. So I knew a few people in Elvis world, and Scotty Moore's partner, or you could say girlfriend, that makes it sounds like high school.
Yes, but significant other. Yes.
His
Yeah.
companion. She was Gail. She was really helpful to me because she gave me the numbers of all these people that had worked with Elvis, mostly in the at those American Sound sessions, the 69 sessions. So that was a big help. And I tracked down a number of other people talking about the comeback special. Like Steve Binder, I talked to him, the director. There was just a movie that I happened to be in, a documentary about that called Reinventing Elvis. And I think now it's streaming on wherever it's streaming.
Yeah.
And I was interviewed for that, but it's mostly told by Steve and his whole experience in making that special. So I recommend that if you're interested in that. And I guess also from previously talking to people, I also got some other interviews with Ronnie Tutt and Jerry Sheff, who were in Elvis's live band through 69 and most of the 70s. So there's a lot of original research in that one. So yeah, I'm very happy with that book.
Okay.
Return of the King, Elvis Presley's Great Comebacks. We should
Yes.
get the name in there.
Yes. Yeah. And Return of the King, Elvis Presley's great comeback. Yes, and I will include that you have a page on Amazon. I will include that link in the show notes. Yeah, I had always had this kind of, I hate to say childhood, but this romanticism of in another world, right? That the rumor, right, that the Chris Christopherson role was going to go to Elvis in
Mm,
that remake of A Star is Born. And in my mind, if that had happened, then would that have changed his life enough that he may have lived longer? Because being actually treated as a serious actor and getting a chance to show. And once again, Andrew Hickey said, but I think what you don't understand is how much health problems Elvis had and chronic from like how early his mother died and that he may not have been able to live even health wise. But in an alternate universe, I like to think of Elvis having this kind of renaissance as a great character actor.
yeah, I think he was considered for the Tony role in West Side Story.
Yeah.
Think how
And
that would have changed things.
oh yeah, it would just been awesome. All right, so let's talk about Bruce. Let's talk a little bit about the first one. So when you're, how do you, and I'll ask it this way. As we're recording this, news has broke that there's discussions about taking Warren Zane's book, Deliver Me from Nowhere, the making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, and turning it into a film. I don't know if you've read the book. It's an amazing book. I really recommend it. I've written down, by the way, all the ones you've mentioned. And I say this over and over again, it reads like a mystery, Jillian. It's like, why has this star done The River? It's his first commercial success.
Yeah.
He is, and then skip two albums. He does Born in the USA. He goes across everywhere, but in the middle, he does Nebraska. Why does he need to do, or did he need to do this? And it's almost a mystery, and I love it. I think it would make a great story, similar like you try to pick. I really liked the biography Love and Mercy that focused on a lot of Brian doing Pet Sounds,
Mm.
right, along with his later time. So my rambling question is, how do you pick when you're going to do a book? What are you going to cover?
Certainly for the first one. So I said how Quarto's imprint, Voyager Press, they maybe the first one I had was Queen, the Complete Illustrated History. And I like that. Oh, it'd be fun to write a book like that. And I guess through emailing the publicist enough times, I got in touch with an editor there and I was pitching ideas. And the first book that I contributed to was Nirvana, the Complete Illustrated History. And for that one, they did it a bit differently. They told Nirvana's story, and there would be, I think, sidebars focusing on the different albums and other elements, but they had a different person write each chapter. So I wrote a chapter in that book. And so I already had it in. So then you just keep hitting the editor up. I think most of the time the ideas probably came from them, which is actually nice because then you don't have to think of a pitch and persuade them to do it. They already know what they want to do. And so the first one I did on myself was The Doors. I think The Doors, A Complete Illustrated History. And again, I wrote the entire main text through that. And they had different people write about the different albums. So there I had that. And I know that Bruce was suggested by the editor. And it's work, it's a job, sure. And one of the interesting things with that one was that they decided they were always putting these books together in different ways. So they decided that I would not only write the main text, I would also do all the album reviews. So that's a lot of albums there.
That
So
is, yes.
even in 2016, you're telling his life story from beginning to 2015, because that's when I turned it in. And then you have to find room for all the albums. And then
Right.
they also wanted sidebars on to go into a little more detail about something, like the bottom line shows, for example. That was a sidebar.
Yeah.
And I approached it mathematically. Like I must have had a word count of, you calculate how long the album reviews will be and how long the sidebars will be. And then the rest, the word count that's left, that's how you tell the rest of the story.
Okay.
So that was a clinical way
Yeah.
to go about
Almost
it.
a um how much space you have left. Okay, I've put in this.
Yeah.
Now how do I fill in the rest?
Like the
Yeah.
Return to the King book we were just talking about, I think it probably had a minimum. The manuscript must be X amount of words long, but I didn't even worry about that because I thought, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I just wrote until I was finished.
Yeah.
And so certainly that's a lot more freeing. You can just go on. But yeah, when Quarto's books, or the ones I've done anyway, they're all packaged out. This is how we put them together. And I think by then, when I did the Bruce book, I'd already done I did a book for Rough Guides, the Rough Guide to Nirvana, because they had a series of books on different bands, which they don't do that anymore. But so I looked at how the other books are put together to see that template. And they also had a lot of sidebars in that book. So I was used to doing that. So it's a formula you get used to working with.
Mm-hmm.
So that one came out in the Bruce book. That came out in 2016. And I did a couple others for them. I did a Jimi Hendrix one. That one I like quite a bit. I wanted them to do a Janis Joplin one, but they could not be convinced that she was commercial enough. I still think it could have been good.
Yeah.
And I contributed to a Bob Marley book. And then they felt the concept had run its course and they stopped putting those complete illustrated
Mm-hmm.
history books out. But then a couple of years later, they started with this so and so at 75.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think they have Alice Cooper in there at 50 and AC/DC.
Yeah.
And they also now have an album series where they just look at a particular album in its anniversary year. Like
Yeah.
last year, someone did a book on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And I'm thinking, what albums are coming up now that have landmark albums are coming up that have this big anniversary? So I just did one for the publisher. It was the next project after Bruce on Queen's Night at the Opera, and that'll come out next year.
Nice. I usually ask this fairly early in the podcast. Can you remember when you first discovered Bruce? And if you can, when I'm having a solid Bruce fan on here, I'll go, what about his music spoke to you? What about him captivated you? But from your case, can you remember first discovering Bruce and what were your thoughts about him as an artist?
For a long time, I was really more of a casual listener. Certainly, if you're
Sure.
writing about rock music, you're going to know who Bruce Springsteen is because starting
Yeah.
from the 70s, he was everywhere. But the first song I noticed was Born to Run. And it was not so much because of the song itself, but what inspired it, because I could hear that's his modernized version of the girl group stuff from the early 60s and the Phil Spector production and all that, which I love. So that was what spoke to me. I thought, oh, I recognize that. I know where that's coming from. So you think, oh, there's some common ground there. And later on, I'd find out things like I didn't know that he had written Because the Night. I knew Patti Smith and that she did it, but I
Yeah.
didn't know the song's connection to him. So you find that out later. And certainly I remember I didn't listen to Nebraska at the time, but I remember hearing a lot about it because, as you were just saying, it was this big deal. He finally gets this big hit out. And then he does this acoustic album. And there were a lot of people that just, they thought, what is this? They didn't get it. Nowadays, that wouldn't be so unusual for an artist to do that.
Right.
That's their roots album or whatever. And it would be accepted and understood. But for him, it just didn't seem to make sense. Or that was a lot of the thinking you saw in the writing about it at the time. Why would he? You're supposed to build on the commercial success, not put out something that you know is not going to sell as much as the last record. It's
Yeah.
supposed to sell more than the last record. But no, he just was going to do it his way. And thankfully, his label let him get away with that.
Yeah. And the book talks about that um John Landau having to sell the label and the label embracing this. I also could make the same argument. You do Born in the USA, and then you do Tunnel of Love, which is a very different kind of album. So he does seem to, I don't want to say, obviously, like he's self-sacrificing. No, he has a creative voice he wants to make. And I have heard discussions that he almost felt like Born in the USA, Bruce was too big. I got to bring it back a little bit. So as you're researching, as you're writing, give me your thoughts on that.
Actually, you were just saying, I remember it's a quote from him talking about that period where he said after the Born in the USA tours are finally over, and he just said
Yeah.
he was bruised out, as he put it. He
Yeah.
himself. He's a very, I don't think I didn't fully realize this until his memoir came out, which is quite good, I think, as I've said to people. I think if you're interested in rock music of the 70s and the 80s in particular, you'd probably like this book, even if you're not that interested in Springsteen, because he talks so much about the time and the other records coming out and how he tried to fit into it. And I found that interesting. And I think other people, rock fans, that remember that era, which seems so different from how it is now.
Obviously, as someone who does a Springsteen podcast, I'm a mark, as they say. So I knew I was going to get into it, but I was surprised at how well it is done. And obviously, he's a great storyteller in his songs.
Yeah.
And I don't think he is the best interview at times. I
Hmm.
think he's gotten better over the years, but I don't think sometimes he likes talking about himself. But I think his book was very fascinating, especially opening up his fight with depression. I thought
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
very was it was really good to read that I think that's important because there are people just get over it. And
Yeah.
it isn't that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's so self-deprecating too in that.
Yes.
And I love one of my favorite things in that was reading about how when he's a teenager, his friends would wonder, how come the girls all dance with you? Because he's this skinny guy, not rich,
Yeah.
not fashionably dressed. And he said it's because he figured out pretty quickly that girls like to dance. So if you know how to dance, then you will have a lot of available partners because a lot of guys, they didn't want to put in the
Right.
effort to learn how to dance. So that's sissy stuff.
Yeah.
But he would practice and learn how to dance, and then he always had dances at the high school
Yeah.
days. I thought that was a great story, but
That
also just the
yeah.
way he talked about how thoughtful he was in approaching his work, and that he didn't go to college, but he realized he had some kind of educational gaps, cultural gaps. So he would ask people like John Landau, "What film should I see? What book should I see?"
Yeah.
And just how critically he looks at his career, which I think goes back to the changes that he's done, that he'll look at what he's done and think, okay, so where should I go from this point?
Yeah.
And I suppose past a certain point, probably past Born in the USA, because that had done so well,
Yeah.
um, and probably brought in enough money that he probably thought he didn't necessarily have to take commercial concerns, didn't really have to concern himself with the commercial viability of projects as much in the future. Obviously, you want them to sell, yes, but I don't. I guess I have the impression that after Born in the USA, he didn't care if he ever had another blockbuster album again.
Yeah. I know in the biography he talked about he really thought Wrecking Ball would do better commercially. I just think you buy Western stars, and I often, the casual fan or someone who's not a fan that just knows the hits, I'll like, hey, you should check out the Western Stars film. You would be surprised the kind of music he's doing. And I think doing it well. So have you seen him perform live?
Yes, on that tour, in fact, the
Yeah.
2023 tour at
Was
Climate Pledge Arena, really revamped. I
hmm
think just getting water was $5, so that was irritating.
yes.
It's fun sitting down. I was on the side, so you can look over, and you're sitting there and just the atmosphere. And every now and then you just hear someone go, Bruce,
Yes.
just popping up before he even starts. And of course, that was all the big COVID thing. It's the first big tour since COVID.
Yes.
So everyone anticipating that. But
Yeah.
it was interesting to see how production wise, it was just such a very stripped down set, not getting into a lot of elaborate backdrops or lighting tricks, all that stuff. It was really just the band. I think they were pretty much all dressed in black too.
Yeah. Historically, that's what he's done. In fact, someone asked Little Steven, would they ever play the Sphere? And he said, no, we're just not a visual band. We're just not that kind of band. So that's great. So the latest book is out this month, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And so I'm going to pull it up here in Amazon so I can do my pitch for it. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about it. Oh, come on. There we are.
PDF. I still haven't seen the final book myself.
Yeah. Oh, wow. How is that? Is that just the way it goes?
Usually, I know they did just put in a request for. I didn't get my author copies, and then but then the publisher said, "Can you just send her two?" When she does
Yeah.
these interviews, she knows. I've seen
Yeah.
the PDF, so I know what the text is like.
Yeah.
I think I'm not positive, but it might be the same design team that put the Elton John or at 75 book together, which was
Mhm.
really nice. I know
Yeah.
with that book, I think people that I've done the interviews with, they haven't really seen this book themselves either, because I know with Elton's book, and they'd probably do the same with Bruce's, that with Elton's book, they'd say, wow, that the art is so great, all that memorabilia, where did you get it? And I'd say, that was the design department. I had nothing to do with
Yeah.
that, which is great. It's a pain having to track down photos and stuff. But yeah, people really like the look of these books, which I
Yeah.
cannot claim any credit for.
They do look gorgeous. I'm on Amazon, Bruce Springsteen 75, hardcore of April 16th, 2024. It the blurb is experience the extraordinary career of the boss with this richly illustrated package featuring two gatefolds, exclusive pull-out poster, 8 by 10 glossy, and a sturdy slipcase.
Yeah, the
And
slipcase is fun.
what?
The slipcase is fun. I like having a slipcase.
Yeah. And of course, some great verbiage. So you had already worked on this before. What were you really looking forward to getting to when you knew you were going to do an update?
Let's see, look forward to. Well,
Or
you know,
was there something on,
I
was there,
mentioned the Patti Smith story.
yeah,
So I went into more, I made that an entry. So I got to
okay,
write more about that and how all that came together. Because I think in the other book, I just one paragraph version of it. It was actually interesting how, and I said there were actually more similarities between Bruce and Patty than you might think.
yeah,
Because both being from Jersey, both kind of being part of that same New York scene. They both played Max Kansas City, probably
right,
knew enough of the same people. And how when she was given the rough demo of the song, she didn't want to use it because she liked recording her own stuff. But
right,
then so she didn't even listen to it. But then when she was waiting to hear from her boyfriend, Fred Smith, whom she later married, waiting for him to call, she listened to it and she hadn't really realized it was incomplete. There were some lyrics, but not many. And she thought, so I could bring something to this, and it would be like doing an original song. And so, yeah, that was, oh, I always loved it. So haunting and bittersweet. And
Yeah.
I guess in these kind of things, it's fun being able to talk at length about things. Like there's an entry on his friendship with Steve Van Sant, obviously very important and key going back to when they were teenagers. I did look at both of his marriages because they were such huge deals at the time. Remember the frenzy when for his first marriage?
Yes. And
And he was,
what's interesting is I think I wanted to know two things when I was going to buy the biography. I wanted to hear him talk about breaking up the band because I'm fascinated because I was a casual fan during the 80s like everyone else, and then did not become a fanatic till 2002 when The Rising happened, and then I saw him for the first time live in 2002,
oh,
and
okay.
that changed my life. So I really didn't pay attention. So I always think it's fascinating those dark years, right? I fired the E Street Band. We don't come back together till 99 when we do the reunion tour. And then of this marriage that everywhere, right? People magazine is covering this. This is huge. And then to divorce, end up marrying Patty, and have been together for a significantly long time. And he was very candid about he in the marriage was all his failure. He was just not ready. So what did you when you discovered that, what did you see and hear?
What you mean about the marriage?
Yeah, the marriages. Yeah, give us a few tidbits.
I had a sense how when he met Julianne, he just got carried away by the rush of events. This is the year of his big breakthrough, and he meets her, and they get along. And so, hey, let's just get married. I think it was just this constant
Yeah,
rush of things happening. Yeah, he wasn't ready because I don't think probably either of them put a lot of time into thinking about it. And plus, you think of the situation she's walking into, where
right.
here he's this global phenomenon by that point, and so you
Yeah,
have to adjust to being with someone like that, and who he himself is adjusting to that too. I was thinking about that maybe in connection with this interview, but just I don't think people, the ordinary person, realizes how much there is to adjust to when you become really famous like that.
yeah,
And you can imagine it, but then when it
yeah,
happens, it's different.
yeah.
And just the position that you find yourself in, especially people wanting now to insert themselves into your life in so many ways, and just I don't think people appreciate the pressure.
And something must have gone either correctly or something because she's never talked about it. He gives it all himself, blaming it, but she doesn't talk about that. And you would think as his career wanes and goes, someone would say, "Hey, we will pay you a lot of money for a tell-all book," and it just does not seem that makes her. For a while there, I don't know if she's active on Twitter or X as she used to be. For a while, she was very active, and I followed her and really enjoyed. She was very political, especially during the pandemic, and about all the things that I support as a very lonely blueberry in a strawberry state of Texas. Um, Jillian, what have I not asked you that I should have? Is
um
there a story that you've got in your back pocket that you go, oh, yeah, I need to be sure and tell them that?
I should have one ready so when people say that I could do that, but no, I can't really
Okay.
think of
Okay.
that.
Good. I'm gonna give you a chance so you can think about it if you have any final thoughts. I'm gonna ask you to tell people how to reach you. But before I end every podcast with the Mary question. And what that is, I ask
Oh,
my guests, even if they're not a Bruce fan, to listen to Thunder Road. And then Jay Armstrong was an honors English teacher. He is now retired, but at the time, he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would break it down as if it was a poem, discussing the imagery Bruce is using, the themes Bruce explores, and then he was asked his students at the end of the day, does Mary get in the car? Jillian, that is your question.
yeah,
Does
and
Mary get in the car at the end of
I
Thunder
did,
Road?
I did go listen to it again, yes, and I think she does get in the car.
Okay,
I think after all that, I think she just thinks, why not?
I like that. Very nice. All right, if someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
I'm on Twitter, as I still call it, because I don't know, I It's not that I thought Twitter was such a great name, but X is just,
Even
a
dumber.
stupid,
Yes.
yeah, Dumb and Dumber. So I'm there just at Gillian Gar. And then
Okay.
um, I'm on Facebook. I have a fan page that's Gillian Gar Writer. And that's just when you like or follow. It's not a friend request type of thing. And that's where I put all the writing things. And if I'm doing an appearance or like when you put this up, that's where I'll share the link
Okay. Very nice.
or other articles I've written. So that's how
Okay.
those are the
Good.
best.
Any final thoughts before I let you go?
Well, it was a lot of fun because it wasn't just talking about the book, but other background things. So I think that's a good format. I think
Thank you.
the listener can tell a little more about who you're interviewing with all the,
Um,
like what you grow up listening to, that kind of thing.
Thank you. That makes me very happy. Please pass that on to the powers that be that are doing publicity because I'd love to have more writers on. That is my favorite compliment. When someone says, "That was a lot of fun, Jesse. We went into areas that we don't," because I always try to make it where I don't want to ask the same questions everyone else asks. And yes, I want to help promote the book. I want to do what's right, but I also want to make it fun for you. So thank you. Those are very kind words.
Ah, good.
Yeah. Bruce Springsteen at 75, available April 16th. So if I do my math, that is in just a couple of days. So please go check it out. You can buy it online. You can get it at your local bookstore, wherever books are available. And I hope it's an incredible big success, Jillian.
Thank you. I hope so too.
And you did tell me, but I'm drawing a blank. What's your next project you're
On
working on?
Queens and Night at the, let's see, that one's, let's see, there's two answers to that. So the next book is the Queens and Night at the Opera at 50. So that
Ooh,
comes out next year, which I can't
yeah,
believe I have to wait so long for it to come out.
yeah.
But that's done. That's done and completed. And then what I'm working on now is Tom Petty at 75.
Ah, nice. One more question then. Who have you not written about, or what have you not written about that you want to but haven't yet?
It'd be good to do a Kate Bush book. I think Graham Thompson maybe got the definitive one there with Under the Ivy. I actually did end up writing a Joplin book, not for Quarto because they weren't that interested, but there was another publisher and I got the whole manuscript. And the same illustrated history idea. I told a story, the general overview story with some interesting sidebars, but then they decided not to put it out. So I have this manuscript that's just waiting. So yeah, that was frustrating. I would have liked to have written a book about the Rocky Horror Show phenomenon. There's a couple of them out there, but yeah, the ones I read one that was an oral history. I know there's some other more narrative ones. So one would have to see. I'm always interested in writing a Beatles book, but it's hard to think of a new angle.
Yeah.
Although they keep putting them out,
Yeah, there you
but
go. Yes.
I review them if I don't write about them or write one myself. But there's one about the Beatles and fashion, and yeah, that's a new
Right.
idea. If an editor asked me to write a book like that, I'd say sure if they come to you. But what I've suggested, no. So there's that. Actually, now that you mention it, speaking of Elvis, I actually have another Elvis book coming out this year. I finally saw the cover online.
What is
Uh,
that?
I think it's called the Elvis Presley Treasures. It went through a couple different titles, but
Okay.
last year I was approached by Inside Editions to see if I'd write this book. And what they were doing is they're working in conjunction with the Elvis Estate, EPE. And it's a book, it was on the Elvis in 100 Objects idea, except that's not the book's title. They took, I think it is about 100, or maybe slightly more than that, 100, 110 items from the Elvis archives, and they take a nice picture of it. And then I write a short caption about it, a couple hundred words. Like they had the original mailbox at Grace and this shoebox that Gladys, Elvis's mother, kept photos in. So you think of for that one, I remember writing that one because you're trying to put it in context. This is where the family kept their photos, and in those days, they probably didn't even own a camera.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a big deal to even have these photos. These were precious, and they didn't even have the money to buy an album, so she just kept them in this shoebox, kind of thing. And some of his jewelry, and probably some of his guns and his badges, the police badges.
Yeah.
I think the wrist, the studded wrist thing that he wore during the comeback special,
Hmm.
during the sit down sequences, bracelet. So yeah, that's coming out in August for just in time for Elvis Week.
Any interest in doing fiction?
I get ideas, but I admire fiction writers because I think when you do things like I do, nonfiction, the story is there. You just have to put it together or retell it in through your lens. But with fiction, you have to. People think, oh, you could just make it up. It's tricky. I had an idea for a great mystery series. This friend of mine was married to a fellow who played Ringo in a Beatle impersonator band, and so for his day job, he worked for a private investigator. So there, right there, that was the story idea. Ringo, Private Eye, and it would
Right.
be about this guy who was in a Beatle impersonator band and then got into all these interesting things as a private investigator. But I thought, how do you work out plots of mysteries? That's very tricky. I asked him about his work, and he didn't do anything really exciting, say you see on Magnum PI or something.
Yeah.
He said he worked a lot of insurance type cases. And
Sure.
so here's a tip. When they're looking into insurance fraud, one of the first places they look for information is on Facebook.
Yeah.
So be careful what you post.
Well,
Someone filed a claim with an
yeah.
insurance company, and then there's pictures of them surfboarding.
There is a wonderful writer named Lisa Lutz, Lutz, and she wrote a series of books from called the Spellman Chronicles, and it's all about a family of private eyes. The father and mother own the eye agency. Their their son is an attorney who's the absolutely perfect child, right? And Isabella, who is our main character, is the daughter, and she's the mess up. Then they have a younger daughter. And so Lisa talked about she worked at a private eye, was it? And she goes, everything's boring. So, like, and she said, like, one of her mysteries in her book is why does the younger daughter is still in high school, and one of her teachers, after he blows his nose, he opens the desk drawer and puts the Kleenex in that, not in the wastebasket.
Uh-huh.
And she's like, why is that happening? And she goes, those are the kind of mysteries that I end up doing. I don't know if you are really good at plot, reach out to Gillian, and then she's really good at characters. You guys could come up a duo together, because I
Okay.
would buy Ringo Starr by night, Ringo by day, Private Eye. I'm sold. I'm just sold. I think that's great.
If someone's going to hear that and run with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jillian, for this
Thank
wonderful
you.
time. I am so glad you had fun. Anytime, if you need me this summer to promote the Elvis book you want to do next year, The Queen, just all you got to do is email me and we'll make it happen. All right.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yeah. Listeners, go to Amazon. I will have the link in the show notes. Go to your local bookstore. If you are someone who loves to support local bookstores, good for you. Bruce Springsteen at 75, out on April 16th. You will love it. This is going to be awesome. And so we're going to end with just saying thank you so much, Jillian. And listeners, please remember to be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.